Dan Rather, do you remember him? Do we have this 1987 clip? This is like Dan Rather's claim to fame here because there was a big dust up in a presidential interview. Let's take a look.
I find this to be a rehash and a little bit, if you'll excuse me, a misrepresentation on the part of CBS, who said you're doing political profiles on all the candidates, and then you come up with something that has been exhaustively looked into.
Mr. Vice President,
yes.
The President himself has said he wants all the facts out. He gave up such things as even his own diary. Every principal, including Secretary Schultz, he gave up some of it.
Well, Dan, let's be careful here because you're...
Yes, sir, I want you to be careful, Mr. Vice President, because of the problem.
I will be careful. It's not fair to judge my whole career by a rehash on Iran. How would you like it if I judged your career by those 7 minutes when you walked off the set in New York? Well, now, would you like that?
Oh, we should play those 7 minutes too. But anyway, that is Dan Rather getting into it there with Bush Sr. And Dan Rather wants you to know that he can fix the media. If you just listen to him, then he's got the prescription for how you can really fix the media going into 2024. Listen, I used to work at CBS News. I somehow survived Dan Rather, Bob Schieffer, and Katie Couric. So, all like within the span of a year and a half. So, hey, that's a claim to fame, right? Anyway, Dan, it definitely had a bias. And that was pretty darn evident. I think everybody's quite aware of that bias. So it's sort of funny to hear Dan Rather say, this is how we're going to fix the media in 2024. But these are his ideas. Let's throw him up and give him a little shout out for his little Twitter account. He says, if I may, there's something I need to get off my chest. As democracy remains under siege, it has been frustrating to watch the press, how the press covers politics these days. I am reminded by lessons that came to me during the Nixon years as a CBS News correspondent. By the way, that's part of the problem. Right? They're all still like from the Nixon year era, that entire entourage of people that then was managing news networks. That is the problem, because they all thought because of the Nixon thing that they had to be X, Y, and Z. And well, they're just hardcore liberals as a result. Let's go on to what he says, because he's got his little bit of advice. One, enough with the both sidism. When one side lies intentionally and repeatedly, they are no longer entitled to the benefit of the doubt. They should be held to account right away. Do not simply repeat the narratives they spew. And yet, let's be very clear. There is one side that's been lying over and over and over again. And you know that Dan is in agreement with that side. Therefore, this whole little charade of his is kind of funny. Let's prioritize live fact checking. Okay, good. Yeah, let's do that. Let me tell you, Dan, you're not going to come out ahead on that side of things. And then he's got number 3, and then he encourages you to go look at his newsletter for the rest. Do we have the number 3? You see how he says if Trump says the sky is green, don't assume it's green. It's so biased, ladies and gentlemen. And what's crazy about this is that he thinks he's not biased. He actually thinks he's right down the middle. And that's the irony of it all. Ask lawmakers hard questions. Yeah, duh. Okay, and then he goes on to promote his newsletter, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll tell you, this is kind of the same old from Dan Rather. He did this, I think, back in 2018. Do we have that clip? He was pushing the same darn stuff.
If you're really interested in identifying fake news and figuring out what to believe, if you're truly invested in the work of being a good, informed citizen, may I respectfully offer a short primer. Number 1, understand that trusting a news outlet does not mean they're perfect. No one's perfect. It means they tell you when they screw up. Number 2, don't rely on just one news outlet.
Okay,
Number 3,
blah, blah, blah. I don't disagree with him on any of it. I'm just saying that he somehow, in his own little tunnel vision, kind of like the Colorado Secretary of State that somehow thinks that the Supreme Court is ruining the country because they didn't go along with her decision to kick Donald Trump off the ballot. In his own like narcissistic state, he thinks that he's the only one that understands what news is. My point that I keep making over and over and over again is to listen to everything. I mean, this is what Chris Wallace missed, right? When he's like, oh my goodness, how dare Tucker Carlson go do an interview with Vladimir Putin? It's like, hey buddy, you know what? A real journalist does do that because you've got to hear from this one and that one over here. And that's the only way that history really is properly recorded with all the biases, okay? Nothing's perfect. And we have to be able to cut through those biases, but wouldn't you rather hear them than ignore them? Anyway, that's Dan Rather pretending like he has no bias. I'll tell you this, you know what? I have bias and I'm darn proud of it. My bias is for an economy that's going to grow, for a nation that's going to stay safe, and for equal opportunities for everyone, regardless of male, female, or the color of your skin, because we live in a meritocracy that is the United States of America. That's pretty simple, guys. That's my bias. And I wear it on my sleeve proudly, happily. I am a red-blooded American capitalist.